Tonight, a border agent is out of a job after video of an aggressive roadside detention went viral. The motorist he pulled from his car without cause was Sergeant First Class Marcus Williams, a decorated Delta Force operator. Within hours, the agency launched an investigation and terminated.
Step out of the vehicle, now!
Sir, is there a reason for
Don't
that?
argue with me! Out of the car, let's go!
I'm sitting still, hands on the wheel.
I said out!
I'm reaching for my credentials, right hand, moving now.
Make it quick.
Copy.
The sun was barely rising over the El Paso sector of the United States-Mexico border when Master Sergeant Damon Carter pulled his rental car up to the checkpoint on Highway 62, returning from a weekend visit to see his mother in Juarez. She had moved there 3 years ago to be closer to her sister after his father passed, and Damon made the trip whenever his schedule allowed, which wasn't often given the demands of his position with the Army's most elite Special Operations Unit. At 44 years old, Damon had spent 26 years in uniform, the last 18 with Delta Force, officially known as 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. He had participated in operations on every continent except Antarctica, had been awarded 2 Silver Stars, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor, and a Purple Heart for wounds sustained during a hostage rescue in Syria that remained classified to this day. He spoke 4 languages fluently, had trained Special Operations Forces from 12 allied nations, and was considered one of the most experienced operators in the entire United States military. His personnel file, what portions of it weren't redacted, read like a chronicle of America's most sensitive military operations over the past 2 decades. None of that was visible as he sat in his rental car that Sunday morning, wearing jeans and a simple black t-shirt, his military ID and passport ready in his hand. He looked like any other traveler returning from Mexico. A tall, powerfully built black man with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of calm, watchful demeanor that came from years of operating in hostile environments. He had made this crossing dozens of times without incident, presenting his documents, answering a few routine questions, and continuing on his way to Fort Bragg, where he was due back for duty Monday morning. Today would be different. The checkpoint was busier than usual for a Sunday, with a line of vehicles stretching back several hundred yards. Damon waited patiently, watching the Border Patrol agents move from car to car, checking documents, occasionally directing vehicles to secondary inspection. He noticed that the agents seemed to be spending more time with certain vehicles than others, and he noticed which vehicles those tended to be. It was a pattern he had observed before, one that never failed to leave a bitter taste in his mouth, despite his decades of service to the country whose uniform he wore. When his turn came, he rolled down his window and handed his documents to the agent who approached. The man was white, mid-30s, with a buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes. His name tag read, Kowalski, and something about his posture, the aggressive forward lean, the hand resting on his sidearm, immediately put Damon on alert. "Purpose of your visit to Mexico?" Kowalski asked, his tone already hostile. "Visiting my mother. She lives in Juarez." Kowalski examined the passport, flipping through pages filled with stamps from countries around the world. His lip curled slightly. "Lot of travel here. What do you do for work?" "I'm in the military." "Military?" The word dripped with skepticism. "What branch?" "Army." Kowalski looked at him for a long moment, then at the passport, then back at him. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Damon felt a familiar tension in his shoulders but kept his voice calm. "Is there a problem, Agent?" "I said step out of the vehicle. Now." There was no point in arguing. Damon had been through enough checkpoints in enough countries to know that resistance only made things worse, that the smart play was always to comply and sort things out later. He opened the door and stepped out, keeping his hands visible, moving slowly and deliberately. Kowalski gestured toward a secondary inspection area off to the side of the main checkpoint. "Over there. We're going to need to search your vehicle." "May I ask why?" "You may not." Kowalski's voice had risen loud enough to attract attention from other travelers and agents. "Move, now." Damon walked to the secondary area, acutely aware of the eyes on him from every direction. Other travelers watched from their cars. Other agents had stopped what they were doing to observe. He could feel the weight of their attention, the assumption that he must have done something wrong to deserve this treatment. The secondary inspection area was a concrete pad with bright overhead lights, even in the morning sun, and a small building that housed processing equipment and holding cells. Kowalski directed Damon to stand against a wall while another agent, a younger man who looked uncomfortable with the entire situation, began searching the rental car. "Hands on the wall. Spread your legs." Damon complied, assuming the position he had seen countless detainees assume over the years, never imagining he would find himself in their place on American soil. Kowalski patted him down with unnecessary roughness, hands probing areas that had nothing to do with weapons or contraband, lingering in ways designed to humiliate rather than search. "Where'd you really get all those stamps in your passport?" Kowalski asked, his mouth close to Damon's ear. "Drug running? Human trafficking? What's your game?" "I'm a soldier. Those stamps are from military deployments." Kowalski laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Right. A soldier. That's a new one. You people always have a story. You people." There it was, the phrase that revealed everything, that stripped away any pretense of legitimate law enforcement and exposed the raw prejudice beneath. Damon had heard those words before, many times, in many contexts. He had learned to absorb them, to file them away, to keep moving forward despite them. But something about this moment, this place, this man with his badge and his gun, and his absolute certainty that Damon was a criminal, ignited a cold fury that he struggled to contain. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor, Damon C.I. said, his voice level. "My supervisor is busy. You're talking to me. Then I'd like to make a phone call. You're not under arrest. You're being detained for questioning. You don't get a phone call." The younger agent emerged from the rental car, shaking his head. "Nothing, Rick. Car's clean." Kowalski's jaw tightened. "Search it again." "I searched it thoroughly. There's nothing there." "Then search his bags. Search everything." Damon's single duffel bag was removed from the trunk and emptied. Onto the concrete. Clothing, toiletries, a Spanish-language novel his mother had given him, a small wooden cross that had belonged to his father. Kowalski picked up each item, examined it, tossed it aside with deliberate carelessness. When he reached the bottom of the bag, finding nothing incriminating, his frustration was visible. "What's in your pockets?" "My wallet, my phone, my car keys." "Give them to me." Damon handed over the items, watching as Kowalski rifled through his wallet. The agent pulled out a military ID card and studied it with narrowed eyes. "This says you're a master sergeant. Special operations." "That's correct. Special operations." Kowalski repeated the words with exaggerated disbelief. "You expect me to believe that? That you're some kind of elite soldier?" "I don't expect anything from you, Agent. I'm telling you the truth." Kowalski stepped closer, invading Damon's personal space, his breath hot on Damon's face. "Here's what I think. I think this ID is fake. I think you're a drug mule trying to use a stolen military identity to cross the border. I think you're going to spend a very long time in a federal detention facility while we figure out exactly who you are and what you've been doing." Damon met his eyes without flinching. 26 years of military service had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly when others panicked, to find solutions when none seemed to exist. This man with his badge and his prejudice was not the most dangerous adversary Damon had ever faced. He was just the most infuriating. "That ID is not fake. My identity can be verified with a single phone call to Fort Bragg. I'm asking you, Agent, to make that call before this situation escalates further." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm requesting that you verify my identity through proper channels." "That's not a threat. That's standard procedure." Something flickered in Kowalski's eyes, a moment of uncertainty that was quickly buried beneath renewed aggression. He grabbed Damon by the arm and began pulling him toward the processing building. "You're going to holding. We'll see how cooperative you are after a few hours in a cell." Damon could have resisted. He had the training and the capability to disable Kowalski in seconds, to escape the checkpoint, to disappear into the desert and make his way to safety. But that would make him a fugitive, would end his career, would prove nothing except that violence was sometimes the only answer. He had spent his life proving otherwise, using force only when necessary, building bridges instead of burning them. He wasn't going to let one racist border agent destroy everything he had worked for. So he allowed himself to be led into the building, through a processing area where other agents watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern, and into a small holding cell with concrete walls and a metal bench. Kowalski removed the handcuffs and stepped back, his face flushed with satisfaction. "Comfortable? Good. You're going to be here for a while." The cell door slammed shut, and Damon was alone. He sat on the metal bench and closed his eyes, forcing his breathing to slow, his heart rate to stabilize. He had been in worse situations. He had been captured by insurgents in Iraq, held for 72 hours before his team extracted him. He had operated behind enemy lines for weeks at a time, surviving on minimal food and water, evading patrols that would have killed him on sight. A holding cell at a border checkpoint was an inconvenience, not a crisis. But the injustice of it burned in his chest like acid. He had given his life to this country. He had bled for it, killed for it, watched friends die for it. And here he sat, treated like a criminal, because a man with a badge couldn't see past the color of his skin. He didn't know how much time passed before the cell door opened again. It might have been an hour, might have been 3. But when it opened, it wasn't Kowalski standing there. It was a woman in her 50s, Hispanic, with silver-streaked hair and the insignia of a sector chief on her uniform. Her name tag read Delgado, and her expression was thunderous. "Master Sergeant Carter?" Damon stood. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Sector Chief Maria Delgado. I want to apologize for your treatment here today. There's been a serious misunderstanding, and I assure you it's being addressed. With respect, ma'am, there was no misunderstanding. Agent Kowalski made assumptions about me based on my appearance and refused to verify my identity through proper channels. That's not a misunderstanding. That's discrimination." Delgado's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "You're right. And I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. What I can tell you is that Agent Kowalski has been relieved of duty pending a full investigation. And I can tell you that your commanding officer has been contacted and is quite eager to speak with you." That last part carried a weight that made Damon's stomach tighten. His commanding officer was Colonel James Morrison, a man who had fought alongside Damon in 3 theaters of war, and who did not tolerate disrespect toward his operators. If Morrison had been contacted, then this situation had already escalated far beyond a simple border incident. How did my CO find out about this? Apparently one of the other travelers at the checkpoint recorded the initial confrontation on their phone. The video was posted to social media about 2 hours ago. It's received significant attention. Damon closed his eyes briefly. Of course it had. In the age of smartphones and viral content, nothing stayed private for long. His face, his name, his humiliation were probably being viewed by millions of people at this very moment. "I need to make some calls," he said. "Of course, please come with me." She led him out of the holding area, through the processing center where Kowalski was notably absent, and into an office that had clearly been hastily prepared for his use. His phone, wallet, and other belongings were laid out on the desk, along with his repacked duffel bag. "Take all the time you need," Delgado said. "And again, I'm deeply sorry for what happened here today." She left, closing the door behind her, and Damon was finally alone with his thoughts and his phone. He had 17 missed calls, most from numbers he didn't recognize but a few. From colleagues at Fort Bragg. He had over 200 text messages, the notifications still rolling in as he watched. And when he opened his social media apps, he found that he was trending nationwide. His face plastered across every major platform alongside outraged commentary about racism at the border. The video was everywhere. Someone had captured the entire initial confrontation, from the moment Kowalski ordered him out of the car, to the moment he was led away in handcuffs. The audio was clear enough to hear Kowalski's words, including the damning phrase, "you people." The comment sections were war zones of conflicting opinions, but the overwhelming sentiment was outrage at his treatment. He called Colonel Morrison first. "Damon, are you all right?" "I'm fine, sir. Just got released. I've been on the phone with CBP leadership for the past 2 hours. They're falling all over themselves to apologize. The agent who detained you has been suspended, and there's talk of termination." "I heard." "Listen, I know you probably want to just come back to base and put this behind you. But I need to tell you something. The Secretary of Defense has been briefed. So has the White House. This thing is bigger than one asshole border agent. There are people who want to use what happened to you to make a point about systemic racism in law enforcement. And there are other people who want to make you into a poster boy for the military. Either way, you're going to be under a lot of pressure. In the coming days." Damon rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of the situation settling onto his shoulders. "What do you want me to do, sir?" "I want you to do whatever you think is right. You've earned that. But whatever you decide, I've got your back. The whole unit does. What happened to you was wrong, and everyone who matters knows it." "Thank you, sir. Get back to base when you can. We'll figure out the rest together." Damon ended the call and sat for a long moment, staring at the phone in his hand. He thought about his mother, who had raised him alone after his father died in a factory accident when Damon was 12. He thought about the recruiter who had seen potential in an angry young man from the projects of Chicago, and convinced him that the army could give him purpose. He thought about the brothers he had lost in combat, Men of every race and background who had died fighting side by side for a country that didn't always treat them equally. He thought about the look on Kowalski's face, the smug certainty that he knew exactly what kind of person Damon was without knowing anything at all. And he made a decision. He called a number he had saved but never used, the personal cell phone of a journalist named Marcus Webb, who had profiled the special operations community for a major newspaper 2 years ago. Webb had given Damon his card, said to call if he ever wanted to tell his story. Damon had filed the number away, assuming he would never use it. But today, he was going to tell his story, not for himself but for every person who had been treated the way he was treated, who didn't have military credentials to prove their worth, who simply had to endure. Webb answered on the second ring. Marcus Webb. Mr. Webb, this is Master Sergeant Damon Carter. I don't know if you remember me, but remember you. You're all anyone's talking about today. I've been trying to track down your contact information for hours. I'm willing to do an interview, exclusive. But I have conditions. Name them. I want to talk about more than just what happened to me. I want to talk about the system that allows it to happen. I want to talk about the thousands of people who experience this every day and don't have a military record to prove they're not criminals. I want to make this about something bigger than one incident. There was a pause on the line. That's exactly the kind of story I want to tell. When can we meet? I'll be at Fort Bragg tomorrow afternoon. Can you get there? I'll be on the first flight out. Damon ended the call and gathered his belongings. He had a long drive ahead of him and a lot of thinking to do. But for the first time since Kowalski had ordered him out of his car, he felt something other than anger. He felt purpose. The interview with Marcus Webb was published 4 days later, spanning an entire section of the newspaper's Sunday edition. It told Damon's story, from his childhood in Chicago to his rise through the ranks of special operations to the morning at the border checkpoint when everything changed. But more than that, it told the stories of others. A Latino doctor detained for hours because his accent made an agent suspicious. A black family whose car was torn apart during a search that found nothing. An Asian American businessman who had been called slurs by agents who assumed he didn't speak English. The article sparked a national conversation about racial profiling at the border. Congressional hearings were announced. Civil rights organizations filed lawsuits. The Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection issued a public apology and announced sweeping reforms to training and accountability procedures. And Agent Rick Kowalski was terminated from federal service, his pension forfeited, his name added to a database that would prevent him from ever working in law enforcement again. Damon watched the fallout from his quarters at Fort Bragg, fielding calls from reporters and politicians and advocacy groups, declining most requests but accepting a few that seemed like they might actually make a difference. He testified before Congress, wearing his dress uniform, answering questions with the same calm precision he had shown throughout his military career. But the moment that stayed with him came several weeks after the incident, when he received a letter forwarded from the newspaper. It was from a young black man in Texas, 18 years old, who had been planning to enlist in the IE Army but was having second thoughts after seeing what happened to Damon. If the country treats its heroes like criminals, the young man wrote, why should I risk my life to serve it? Damon spent a long time composing his response. He told the young man about his own doubts, his own experiences with racism both inside and outside the military. He told him about the brothers he had served with, men of every race and background who had proven that shared purpose could transcend prejudice. He told him about the progress that had been made, imperfect as it was, and the work that remained to be done. And he told him that the country was worth fighting for precisely because it was imperfect. That the founding ideals of liberty and equality were not descriptions of reality, but aspirations to strive toward. That every generation had to fight the same battles in different ways, and that the fight itself was what gave life meaning. I can't tell you whether to enlist, he wrote. That's a decision only you can make. But I can tell you that I don't regret my service, despite everything. I've seen the worst of humanity and the best. I've failed and I've succeeded. I've been treated as less than human, and I've been honored as a hero. Through all of it, I've held on to the belief that change is possible, that progress is real, that the arc of history bends toward justice even when it feels like it's bending the other way. He signed the letter and sent it off, not knowing if it would make a difference, not knowing if the young man would ever read it. But he had learned long ago that you couldn't control outcomes. You could only do the right thing and trust that it mattered. 6 months later, he received another letter from the same young man. He had enlisted in the army. He was halfway through basic training. And he had taped Damon's letter to the inside of his locker, reading it whenever the doubt crept in. You were right, the young man wrote. The country is worth fighting for, and I'm going to spend my life making it better. Damon read the letter in his quarters, alone, as the sun set over Fort Bragg. He thought about all the miles he had traveled, all the battles he had fought, all the scars he carried, both visible and invisible. He thought about the border checkpoint and the holding cell and the moment when everything could have gone differently, and he smiled because this was why he had told his story. Not for recognition or revenge, but for the chance to reach one person, to light one spark, to prove that hope was not foolish but necessary. The fight continued. It always would. But today, in this moment, he had won a small victory. And sometimes, that was enough. Colonel James Morrison retired from the Army 2 years after the border incident, after a career spanning 35 years and 5 combat deployments. His final act before leaving Fort Bragg was to recommend Master Sergeant Damon Carter for promotion to Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank in the Army. The recommendation was approved unanimously. Damon served another 4 years before his own retirement, training the next generation of operators, passing down the skills and wisdom he had accumulated over 3 decades of service. He was known as a demanding instructor, but a fair one. A man who judged his soldiers by their actions rather than their backgrounds, who pushed them to be better than they thought they could be. On his last day in uniform, his unit held a ceremony in his honor. Operators he had trained, some of whom had gone on to leadership positions of their own, flew in from around the world to pay their respects. Colonel Morrison was there, along with other officers and enlisted personnel who had served with Damon over the years. Even the Secretary of Defense made an appearance, presenting Damon with the Distinguished Service Medal, the highest peacetime military honor. But the moment that meant the most came at the end of the ceremony when a young sergeant approached him with a letter. It was from the young man in Texas, the one who had almost decided not to enlist, the one Damon had written 2 years ago. He was a staff sergeant now, serving with the 82nd Airborne on his 2nd deployment. And he had written to let Damon know that he was doing what Damon had done for him, reaching out to young people who doubted whether the country was worth serving, sharing his story, proving that change was possible. You started something, the letter concluded. A ripple that's still spreading. I don't know how far it will go, but I know it matters. Thank you for showing me the way. Damon folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket next to his heart. Then he walked out of Fort Bragg for the last time, into a future he couldn't predict but no longer feared. He had done his duty. He had fought the good fight. He had made a difference. And now, at last, he could rest. Maria Delgado, the sector chief who had released Damon from custody and apologized for his treatment, was promoted to Deputy Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection 18 months after the incident. She implemented the reforms she had promised, overseeing mandatory training on racial bias, establishing independent review boards for complaints of discrimination, and creating a culture of accountability that had been lacking for decades. She and Damon stayed in touch, meeting occasionally for coffee when their paths crossed, united by a shared commitment to justice despite their different backgrounds and perspectives. She attended his retirement ceremony, and he attended hers. 2 people who had found common ground in the aftermath of an ugly incident. Rick Kowalski, the agent who had detained Damon, filed multiple appeals against his termination, all of which were denied. He attempted to find work with local law enforcement agencies, but was rejected each time, his name flagged in databases as a liability. He eventually moved to a small town in Idaho, where he worked at a hardware store and avoided conversation with anyone who might recognize him. There were reports that he had undergone a transformation, that he had sought counseling and come to understand the harm his prejudice had caused. There were other reports that he remained bitter and unrepentant, blaming Damon and the media for destroying his career. Damon never sought to verify either account. Some people changed, and some didn't. The important thing was that Kowalski could no longer hurt anyone from behind a badge. The young man from Texas, whose name was Marcus Williams, rose through the ranks of the Army with the same determination he had shown when deciding to enlist. He completed Special Forces training, served 3 combat deployments, and was eventually assigned to Fort Bragg, where he trained under instructors who had themselves been trained by Damon Carter. On the 10th anniversary of the border incident, Marcus published an essay in a national magazine about his journey from doubt to service. He wrote about the letter he had received from Damon, about the spark it had lit in him, about the responsibility he felt to pass that spark along to others. The essay went viral, reaching millions of readers, and inspiring a new wave of conversations about race, service, and the meaning of patriotism. Damon read the essay at his home in North Carolina, where he had settled after retirement, close enough to Fort Bragg to stay connected but far enough to have his own space. He had married 2 years after leaving the army, a woman named Angela who had served as an army nurse and understood the unique challenges of military life. They had no children of their own but had opened their home to foster kids, teenagers aging out of the system who needed guidance and support as they transitioned to adulthood. It was a different kind of service, quieter than what he had done before, but no less important. Every young person who passed through his home received the same message he had given to Marcus Williams years ago, that their worth was not determined by how others saw them, that they had the power to shape their own futures, that the world was worth fighting for even when it seemed determined to beat them down. Some of those young people went on to serve in the military. Others pursued careers in law enforcement or social work or education. A few stumbled and fell, struggled with the demons that had followed them from their difficult beginnings. Damon celebrated the victories and mourned the losses, knowing that he couldn't save everyone but refusing to stop trying. On the night of the 20th anniversary of the border incident, Damon sat on his porch with Angela, watching the stars appear one by one over the North Carolina countryside. His phone had been buzzing all day with messages from journalists requesting interviews, from advocacy groups honoring his legacy, from strangers who had been touched by his story. He had responded to a few, declined most, and turned off the phone as the sun went down. "You okay?" Angela asked, reaching over to take his hand. "I'm good. Just thinking." "About what?" He was quiet for a long moment, searching for words to express something he had never quite articulated. "About how strange life is. 20 years ago, I was sitting in a holding cell, angrier than I'd ever been, convinced that everything I'd worked for was being taken away. And now," he gestured at the house, the land, the life they had built together. "Now I'm happier than I've ever been. Because of what happened, not despite it." Angela squeezed his hand. "That's because you made something good out of something terrible. Not everyone can do that. I had help. A lot of help. Morrison. Delgado. Webb. That kid from Texas who almost didn't enlist. Everyone who believed in me when it would have been easier to look away. That's what you do for other people now. You believe in them when it's hard." Damon nodded slowly. "I guess that's all any of us can do. Believe in each other, keep fighting, hope it makes a difference." They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars brightened overhead. Two people who had found each other late in life and were grateful for every moment they had. The world continued to spin, with all its beauty and ugliness, its progress and setbacks, its endless capacity for both cruelty and grace. And Damon Carter, who had seen the worst and best of humanity, who had been broken and rebuilt, who had transformed his pain into purpose, was finally at peace. The fight would continue. It always did. But tonight, under the stars, with the woman he loved beside him, he allowed himself to rest. He had done enough. He had been enough. And that was something no one could ever take away.